Excellent. Thank you very much, and thank you for being with us here this morning. The Santa Rita Hills, since I am the first producer to speak, just to get your bearing, it does lie 45 minutes north of Santa Barbara, right next to the 101, in between the 1 and the 101, in the East-West Valley. And it's really, it's almost haunted by the eastern valleys that bring in the cool wind over the site, and it's what led Michael Benedict and Richard Sanford to not stumble, but to seek out and find this specific place in 1971. And they found this place, which I assure you is not easy to get to. I drive there every morning, and it is a rough road even to this day. It's a long road, and it's an uncomfortable commute, especially when the rains come down. But what they found there with temperature, and quickly realized as they started digging soil pits in the early 70s and planting to Pinot Noir and Chardonnay on their own roots without American rootstock, was that it had fantastic geology and varied and very unique in that regard. And if you familiarize yourself with the Sanford and Benedict right now, it was the first vineyard that was planted in what we now call the Santa Rita Hills to Pinot Noir. And it's also perhaps one of the more interesting vineyards for several reasons. That's because when California was formed, the coastal part that most of us farm and that most of us taste wines from, formed 30 million years ago. It was a series of different parts of the seabed, almost like a millefeuille coming up that we planted grapes on top of. Sanford and Benedict is really unique in that regard, whereas that seabed that came up was hidden by a mountain, and that mountain came down about 10,000 years ago, which in geology is a blink of an eye. And the benefit for this vineyard is those soils that were unearthed in that landslide from the center of that mountain and spilled out on top of what we call Sanford and Benedict now. Were planted to Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, which everybody pontificates on how difficult they are to grow and how sensitive they are. But they are really interesting transmitters of unique characters and space and time when planted in an interesting site. And the soils that did spill out, I think, give us that interesting site coupled with the humiliating weather that we have. And that soil is what we call in America, it's chert, which the French have a much better name for it. It's called silex. And like all things in French, it sounds much better than chert. And Monterey shale. Those with varying amounts of clay and sand vary throughout Sanford and Benedict. But what does that give us in the glass? That's all very boring geology. But in general, Sanford and Benedict, and what we've found from this site over the last 52 years, is that it's a wine that gets its influence from the earth. It looks inward. It's very much an introvert. It's a darker wine, and when it hits your palate, it's usually, it's not a wine of incredible direction. It's much more of a lake. It sits there, and it's deep, and it's very beautiful, and very wonderful to make. So enjoy the Sanford and Benedict.
If I could just interject one thing. If you came to the tasting last night, I hope you did, and if you didn't, maybe I'll go to this afternoon. And there were an enormous number of great wines upstairs. And when I taste these two wines, I find them so exciting. And I think it's one of the things that sometimes is, maybe lacking is too strong of a word, but there's not a contextualization. When you taste the reference point wines that were upstairs and you taste these wines, I think, if it hasn't, I hope it will, the light switch kind of goes off of where we are qualitatively in the world. Because those are all elite wines upstairs, and I think you're going to find a similar theme here. But, I know these wines, I've tasted them like many, many times, and still I have the feeling as if I'm tasting them for the first time. They're just beautiful. Congratulations. Tell us the difference so if I taste Sanford and Benedict, the wine's a little richer, a little darker, and then the Rinconada is a little bit more nervy and more energetic. That's because of exposure to the wind, right?
That's right. The soils change from Sanford and Benedict and La Rinconada, which are planted next door to each other. Sanford and Benedict has gravel, much smaller stones, but very similar to what we find in La Rinconada. It was the same landslide that kind of spilled into Rinconada as well. But Rinconada is the buffer of the wind and the constant onslaught, the unnerving, almost omnipresent wind that punishes our area. And La Rinconada, the second wine, is getting that all day long. And what that does to the vines, it slows down their growth. It helps them hold on to their acidity tremendously. It gives the Pinot Noir a thicker skin, so much different structural profile in the wine. And unlike the Sanford and Benedict, which is a little more protected, a little warmer, La Rinconada is completely exposed. And it gives you a wine of direction and intensity. It's very mineral. And it's much more, whereas I would describe Sanford and Benedict is getting its influence from the earth, La Rinconada gets its influence from the ocean. And it's a very nervy wine. It's very nervous, but what it has to share is usually very beautiful, and a wine that I feel might get overshadowed by Sanford and Benedict, but only because it was planted 20 years earlier, and perhaps has a little more name recognition, but I love the wines from the site. I think it's wonderful that the French planted these forests hundreds of years ago for the French Navy to have beautiful ships to take over the ocean, and it didn't work out for them. But the benefit for us is we have beautiful tight-grained French oak from the center of France predominantly to age our wines in. And I'm a good red-blooded American like everyone else in this room, I'm sure, and I would love to use American oak. It just does not taste that good with Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. It's great for bourbon, and when neutral, it's great for Scotch. And for Ridge. I don't know what those guys are doing. They figured that out. But that being said, the thing, and speaking about the Santa Rita Hills in general, and Rinconada and Sanford and Benedict, it's a very mineral site. And with a site like that, it's generally more of an introvert. It doesn't like a lot of contact. And you heard from Gavin with his Chardonnay. He uses 15% new oak. We could use more new oak. I love the taste of new French oak, but that's not why we're farming where we are. We want the wine to represent the land, and in an area like this, you can't use a DRC regimen of 100 to 80% new oak. The mineral site just does not hold that. And so what we're trying to do with everything from whole cluster to native fermentations to how many leaves we leave on the canopy and to French oak is we try to spend a lot of money on that French oak so you can't taste it and so that you can taste the land. Thank you.